Last year, The Precious Legacy, an exhibition of Jewish artifacts from Czechoslovakia, toured museums in Canada. It showed us a vibrant community that had thrived in the Czech lands for 10 centuries, a community that was completely wiped out in the concentration camps of World War II. Otto Lowy is the host of CBC Radio's The Transcontinental. Like most Canadians, he was deeply moved by the exhibit. But what made it special for him was that he grew up in the Prague ghetto. What you will see tonight is the dramatic retelling of his experience.
Prague. It's considered one of the most beautiful cities in Europe, Prague. Sometimes it's called the Paris of the North, the Jerusalem of the East. Excuse me, that's the other way around. The Paris of the East, the Jerusalem of the North. The Jewish sector is small, but it is one of the oldest on the continent. In 1938, when the Nazis came, they decided to confiscate all the property of the Jews in the Czech lands, gather it in Prague, and turn it into a bizarre museum to an extinct culture. A flood of artifacts began arriving in Prague, shipped the very same day as the owners were being deported to the death camps. The artifacts filled all 5 synagogues in the city, as well as numerous additional warehouses. 140,000 pieces were collected in all, 2 for every Jewish man, woman, and child in Czechoslovakia. Some of the most beautiful and the most important of these artifacts we'll now see in this traveling exhibition.
My presence somehow unsettles you. A stranger you look in the eye, the discomfort of an unrecognized feeling. But I'm not really a stranger to you. I'm one of those artifacts, a part of that legacy. And that perhaps is what you see in my eyes and don't understand. Once in a while, I go back. I want you to understand, not home, back. Home is where I live. That's there. But back is the past, the distant past. You see, as I grow older, I think of my past, of the beginnings and the time before the beginnings. I want to think of them. I want to find out about them so that before I die, I know why I'm dying and how I am dying and why I didn't die when I should have died. And so, once in a while, I go back into the present of a certain place, of a certain town, of a certain country. Prague, my past. The only place where I can find it and think about it when I come home afterwards. It's the only place where I can find the answers for the questions my son will ask before I die. Back there where I live now, I used to pick up my small son out of the chair in which he has fallen asleep, and walking slowly, I carried him into his bed, the way my mother's brother carried his son to that always smoking chimney stack. And that's why I still come back from time to time, to find out why I wasn't here when it happened. Perhaps if I ever find out, then no more nightly funeral processions back there where I live, between the mountains and the sea.
The Jewish quarter is located in the Old Town district of Prague. The quarter edged the Old Town Square and ran down to the banks of the Vltava. Josef of the Ghetto, the ancient center of a thriving, vibrant Jewish community.
Josefov, 10 centuries old. Once a dark tangle of dark buildings and narrow cobblestone streets that remember 1096, when the Crusaders rode through those streets and slaughtered the Jews of Prague. The plague in 1473, a sacking in 1541, And then, about 1890, the tall walls of the ghetto came tumbling down, a breath of fresh air. Prague, wondrous Prague. Palaces, spires, roofs, 1,000 red roofs, small and large squares, streets, large and small. The old town, Baroque gardens hidden away, theaters, statues, bridges, a quay, the river. I used to kick a leather ball here, high into the air. Sometimes I'd have to get it out of the river. When the snows came, toboggans down to the river's edge. The Vltava used to freeze over in the winter, skating in the evening, and under the arch, my first kiss, skates and unsteady legs. Romantic? I suppose, for a young boy growing up in the Gothic shadows of Prague. Beauty and death. At night, gas lamps on each corner and deep shadows in between. The light, a yellowish glow, crooked shadows on peeling walls, the shadows of 100 spires. Walking down the alleys, mysterious, irresistible to the boy who stops from time to time in the shadows between the light of the lamps and listens to the echo of his own footsteps. And often it wasn't an echo at all, another pair of feet. From the deep shadows, a voice, a woman's voice. Every lane, every alleyway had a voice like that.
And over here, the beginning of a life in the ancient ghetto of Prague. Behind the glass, the circumciser's equipment, a knife, the tip of the blade rounded, the handle agate, and the circumciser will say, "Blessed art thou, Lord our God, King of the universe."
We were all very young, and some of the boys came to school from the country, under the showers, after the gym class. First they laughed and pointed at me. They've never seen anything like that before. For a long time, I've never felt more different than on those days under the showers. Three stories high, the world of a child. I used to run up these stairs to my supper. When I was a boy, I would look at this footstep, worn down by 100 years of my ancestors, and wonder when my foot would fit. You never forget the secret games, the secret locks, the last few steps to your front door. organ grinders in the courtyard, and from up here, pennies thrown down, wrapped in bits of paper.
Some of the most important artifacts in the museum are those concerned with the ritual preparations for burial. References in the Talmud indicate that during the early centuries of this era, these preparations were considered the responsibility of the entire community or its representatives, the burial society. On this large graphic, Prague's ancient cemetery. Here lie the musicians and waiters, physicians and teachers, seamstresses, merchants, lawyers,
The old cemetery.
that comprise the
For 500 years, the Jews of Prague were not allowed to bury their dead outside the ghetto walls. So it was inevitable that they would eventually run out of space. There was only one way: bury them one on top of the other. When, at the end of the 19th century, the cemetery was officially closed, the dead were stacked 12 layers deep.
As you can see from this graphic, one tombstone here stands upright. Here lies Rabbi Lowy, who in the 16th century, so legends say, fashioned a huge figure of clay.
Here lies Rabbi Lowy, who made a huge monster of clay and put under its tongue a small scroll of parchment, and on it the words Shem HaMeforash, the never-pronounced name of God. And the giant came alive and patrolled the crooked streets of the ghetto, a clay figure defending the rights of the people given to them by the king. Rights given, rights taken away. The story of the Jews, the protector turning on the protected. The story of the golem. The monster's strength was superhuman, but because on Shabbos, the golem, like everybody else, was forbidden to work, Rabbi Lowy took the parchment out of his mouth on Friday night, and the golem became lifeless. But once, just once, Rabbi Lowy forgot. He was already at Friday night service at the old synagogue when suddenly the golem went berserk. First he destroyed all furniture around him, then he tore to bits all bedding, then on the street began to choke all cats and dogs in his path, destroying whatever came into his way. And the people of the ghetto shouted, "Yossele Golem has gone crazy." His eyes spewed little flames and his huge head shook crazily. They brought the news of the disaster to Rabbi Lowy at the synagogue. He left the service, confronted the golem in the street, and quickly removed the parchment from the giant's mouth. The maddened golem, all covered with blood, earth and feathers, collapsed into a heap of dust and clay. I remember what they said about the dust and clay. They said that Rabbi Lowy, with the help of the shamus Abraham Chaim, carried the dust and the clay up into the loft of the old synagogue, and there hid it under some crumbling old prayer books and moldering old prayer shawls. The old synagogue. And when my father took me there on some very rare occasions, I never looked up to its ceiling, and sometimes I thought I could hear heavy footsteps moving aimlessly.
the Torah mantles, the Torah binders, the Torah shields, the Torahs on the altar behind the ark. In front of it, the Torah curtain. Several here in this room, elaborately embroidered, executed with small pearls, a local specialty. The richness of the Prague synagogue textiles, probably the result of the historical emphasis placed on textiles in the Czech lands generally. Over here, that photograph, one of the large synagogues in the new town outside the ghetto. The Jerusalem Temple in Jerusalem Street. In 1941, the German Office for Jewish Affairs used it to store the furniture taken from the houses and apartments of the Jews of Prague.
And 6 years before the Jerusalem Street Temple became a warehouse for confiscated furniture, here, on this place, I was proclaimed a man. A family gathering, a large family gathering, the Jerusalem Temple in Jerusalem Street in the new town. I was afraid. Now I recognize the symptoms. Stage fright, only I didn't know it then. Weeks of going up to the rabbi's apartment, it always smelled of things being cooked. The early 30s. The synagogue was very large, a rows above the altar, and the pews in the front, the family, cousins, uncles. My father alone in the last pew. Family problems, and I wondered if he would be there. An encouraging, if worried smile from the rabbi. He knew the passages I would have trouble with. The open Torah, the silver pointer, my throat dry. I would have to start now. Loud, loud, the rabbi whispered. Behind me, not the usual, rather comforting murmur of men praying. Here, now, silence. The pointer moved across the parchment, and I started to read. And then it was over, and I was outside the synagogue, and the family all around me, and my father was gone. And they all said I was a man now, and I didn't feel different at all. The gates are closed now. On Saturdays, not even 10 men for minyan. And the sign says, "Aren't we all children of the same father?" Not even 10 men. March the 15th, 1939, and the lineups of thousands began outside the foreign embassies in Prague. Only a few of them opened their doors. At the end of the block, a park, and across from the park, a railway station. March the 28th, 1939. On the platform, my mother, her brothers, cousins, and she said, "Don't forget to see a dentist regularly, and you are a big boy now, almost a man. You know what I mean. What matters is that you, whatever is going to happen here, you'll be out of it. I'll follow you in a few weeks." And that was the last time I saw her.
Here, nailed to the wall in the plastic box, a battered suitcase, exhibit number 291, transport suitcase, Prague, 1942. On it, crudely written in white letters, the name Otto Schwarzkopf, Praha, Krasnohorska number 4, and the numbers AAL 351X. In 1941, the transports began. Some 76,000 Jews were taken from the Czech lands and transported to the old fortified town of Terezín.
When it was all over, 3,100 returned to Prague, 15,000 children, and in the end, only about 170 came back.
The next room is the last room of the exhibit, the last of the artifacts.
There was, of course, a first time. The first time I came back, 1945. The house, and in the apartment, strangers. I was looking for the next day that should have followed that day at the station years ago. In the old ghetto, the old town hall of the Jews, and on its spire a clock with its Hebrew numerals in gold, running backwards for centuries. Despite floods and pogroms, it ran backwards, pointing towards the past, counting away the centuries of survival in this quarter. It seemed a likely place to make inquiries. Lists, but not the name I was searching for. A lady bent over the lists, looked up and said, "I know. I stood right behind her on the Auschwitz platform." Your mother, getting a bit gray, glasses, Mengeles' white glove moved slowly, lazily. The finger moved to the left. "What did you expect?" the lady said. "Gray hair and glasses." She went right up the chimney. I left the building, and the old clock still ran backwards. No one home in the ghetto anymore. No one even left to tend the graves. And now the whole city seemed to me an enormous cemetery. And I knew I couldn't live in a graveyard. That's why I left, knowing I'd come back again and again.
Number 298, The Wedding of the Butterflies. Ilona Vaisova, born 1932. Terezín, 1942. Auschwitz, 1944. Perished Auschwitz. Pen and pastel on paper. And somebody tacked this poem on the wall, nobody knows who. The last, the very last, so richly, brightly, dazzling yellow. Perhaps if the sun's tears would sing against a white stone, such a yellow is carried lightly way up high. It went away, I'm sure, because it wished to kiss the world goodbye. For 7 weeks I've lived in here, penned up inside this ghetto, but I have found my people here. The dandelions call to me, and the white chestnuts candles in the court. Only I never saw another butterfly. That butterfly was the very last one. Butterflies don't live here in the ghetto. Go this way.
I used to fall in love with girls like Ilona Vaisova, born 1932, Auschwitz, 1944. And I used to fall in love with girls like you. I think you know that. Today I'm one of your artifacts. A child then, a man now. And men sometimes fall in love, suddenly, and in unexpected places. I'm also a survivor, and that's why you are here. That's why we are all here. And because it was almost the end of us, there had to be a new beginning again. One of us will teach these children how to sing again, to write on paper with a pencil, to do sums and multiply. One of us is sure to survive.